You and your father, with the encouragement and then blessing of the Dalai Lama, created this huge project called the Atlas of Emotions. This was a way of mapping all of the emotions for a certain goal in mind. So if you could describe what's the goal of the Atlas of Emotions that you and your father spent so many years working on together?
Yeah, the goal is quite simple. The goal was one of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who said, in order for us to find our way to the new world, we needed a map. And in order for us to find our way to a calm mind, we need a map. So the goal is a calm mind. And this doesn't mean aloofness, not caring, the world events not affecting us, our loved ones being sick, we don't care. Calm means a place we return to when we become emotionally and kind of intensely aroused. But when we have a calm mind, we can have these acute emotional arousals and not get so sticky on it. So the goal is, once we can identify and name our emotions, we have some capacity to, this elusive word, but make space around them. And what we
Mhm.
know from the research is that this is called emotion granularity. So when we get really specific and name and identify our emotions, we're actually halfway to having some capacity and control to be with them, and especially be with how we respond to them. When we talk about working with emotions, we're not talking about getting rid of triggers. Good luck. We're talking about how can we come into awareness so we can impact how we respond to those emotions.
Okay, so this notion of granularity, being able to name the emotion in its specificity, how does that help us go to a place of spaciousness? Why do I need to be able to name it? Can't I just be like, something weird's happening? I'm going to go towards a big space. Why does naming help?
Yeah, such a good question. So it's interesting. There's a couple research insights I can point to that I think are useful for folks. And one is, especially, let's consider the end of the day. How was your day yesterday? Oh, hard. Okay. So with that statement, what you're recalling is kind of this peak end rule. You remember the most intense thing, and often you're remembering the thing that happened at the end of the day. And that doesn't necessarily give you the full spectrum of your entire day and its richness. So a little bit of research I got to do at UCSF is giving people, an iPhone app to track their emotions throughout the day. And these were residents who were very burnt out. That is usual for residents, right? Here they are in training, doing intensely hard work, being evaluated all the time with no sleep. It's a recipe, right? So that's a challenging time for folks. And when you ask them about burnout, what you're asking them is, how was your last 2 weeks? They report this intensity and difficulty of daily experience. But when you ask them throughout the day, many times, they report a whole variety, a kind of richness, this granular richness of emotions. I feel content. I feel anxious. I feel frustrated. I feel content again. And what we found with this group, we did, 100 participants over 2 weeks. Most of them reported 2 to 3 times a day. More than 50% of their emotions were enjoyable emotions, feeling content and feeling good. That was surprising for them. In our follow-up interviews, just naming those emotions throughout the day reframed or brought mindfulness to their daily lived experience. So that's one aspect of why this granularity is helpful. Another aspect that's helpful is when we are specific with our emotion experiences and kind of naming them, they're less likely to be operating in the background, draining us, almost awaiting this opportunity to then kind of explode at the wrong moment. So we can suppress our emotions. It's a really useful skill. We should do so very often. And yet, if we're never tuning in, identifying or naming what we're feeling, we're also kind of building up this reservoir you could think of charge or difficulty. It's also well explained through our autonomic nervous system, right? So if we're kind of having this buildup of over-arousal and stress that we're not attending to or releasing to in a certain way, it just becomes difficult for us to see clearly. There's a lot of amazing research about the impact of stress and over-arousal of stress on memory, on cognition. So this naming of our emotions diffuses the emotion because we're able to see it and then do this other interesting term in psychology, which is decentering. So I am not anger, I am angry.
Now, I want to talk more about the atlas, but just personally for a moment, do you have a kind of set of go-to moves, if you will, when you feel yourself, whoa, that's a big emotion, not the time to express it. Here's what I do.
Yeah, I do. And I will be totally honest that, of course, they don't always work. It's especially, we get run down. If I'm tired, if I'm hungry, some of what we call in the Atlas of Emotion as our precondition. So if my leading up to an emotion event, I don't have a lot of resources, it'll be harder to call on those tools. So just to name that with humility, that these are difficult experiences for us to manage, especially big emotions. One of the number one moves that I take is to really go and feel the sensations in my belly. It could be anywhere. I could notice sensations in my chest. I could notice sensations maybe around my face. But what I like to do is just notice this kind of bodily imprint of emotion experience and using what's called interoception, or this bodily felt experience, to help me be present. Once I am noticing the sensations in my body, it's almost as good as though I was being able to name it or say exactly what it was. Another one I really try to do is essentially as though I were leaning back, zooming out. I may not physically move anywhere, but inviting in this sense of, okay, can I step back? And there's these wonderful teachings. This is by 8th century master Shantideva, not a contemporary scientist, but an ancient scientist of the mind. And this advice he gives us for strong emotions, which is remember scope. Remember that your feeling in this moment, in the context of our greater world, may or may not have as much poignancy. And he asks us to remember complexity. Whatever is happening right now is connected to so many other things. It's just almost unknowable. And then the last, which I find to be, for me, the most inspiring, is this is training. There are always going to be difficult emotions, difficult feelings. Can I use this one as my training ground to continue to move towards my sense of calm and my ability to recover or have emotional resilience?
And then back to this notion of granularity, do you attempt to find the specific word, the specific nuanced emotional word for what you're feeling? Does that help?
It does. I should mention that one early. It's one that I practiced for so long. It's pretty quick for me to be able to identify it. And actually, it's not only the cognitive process; it is the embodied process. I've spent quite a lot of time on retreat, getting really familiar with, again, almost this body map of sensation. So I know that anxiety has this kind of imprint of a little, almost like a chin strap of tension, then below the eyes, whereas anger is more kind of a warm, tense feeling in the chest. So I can use the granularity either through noticing and naming the body, or anger, frustration, anxiety, tension.
I think part of the reason I'm digging in so much to this vocabulary and the notion of granularity is I love words. I love words. And yet I realize I don't have available to me dozens and dozens and dozens of words
Hmm.
within each of the family of emotions. I haven't studied it. I haven't made that an important part of my inner education. And yet,
Hmm.
in looking at the Atlas of Emotions, I thought this is really a missed opportunity here. And I
Hmm.
wonder how many people haven't done that work and haven't
Hmm.
studied all the different, if you will, just going with the Atlas idea,
Hmm.
all the different, countries that are
Hmm.
within any emotional continent. And I guess my question to you is how would you suggest someone approach that if it's learning that is new for them that they'd like to do?
Yeah, such a great question. I actually think the best way, instead of the multitudes, is to start maybe with one emotion per day. And for most of us, it's actually hard to identify a single emotion. So when we're talking about emotion here, we're really using, again, this contemporary scientific term, which is an emotion arises in a 25th of a second, and it generally only lasts 30 to 90 seconds. That's its physiological peak and then coming down. Most of us think of emotions in these long stories. Oh, the afternoon was terrible and all of these things happen. So I invite people not only to go granular, but to go specific. So, okay, well, what was that first incident? Well, yesterday, there I was trying to get to work and I was in traffic. And it was, I was so stressed out. It was so intense. So instead of choosing the whole morning, right, maybe what happened after you got to work and you were late, and then what happened at lunch, and then after lunch, just that one experience. What was the trigger? What was the experience of it? Meaning, what was the emotion? It was frustration or maybe anxiety. And what was the response? So if we get granular, not only on the state or experience of our emotion, but what leads to it and what leads out of it, it invites our natural curiosity. Because, as you said, why learn all these names for emotions, right? I have enough to do. I could maybe learn more about how to be a great taster of wine and learn all those qualities. That's
Yeah,
fun.
that sounds good. That sounds good. Yeah.
This is not that fun. But I think when we look closely at our emotion, especially that kind of timeline of emotion, wow. I mean, there's nothing more interesting. It's so compelling. I can't believe this made me upset. And as we look day after day, we realize there are these patterns. There's like nothing new, right? It's the same material, our same thoughts, our same habits, our same patterns. Of course, different events precede them, but we start to see that some of our emotions are actually quite regular guests.